I work at Office of Digital Learning, which used to be Office of Digital Learning. Now it's called Open Learning, and it's part of MIT. And I am a learning engineer there. And don't ask me what that exactly means. So this talk is about emerging opportunities in EdTech, and that's a very broad term. And hopefully at the end of the lecture, it will be kind of clear where we are going at. And it's fairly conversational, so if you have any questions, anything is unclear, please feel free to stop me, ask questions, and just chat, discuss, talk about your worries about EdTech, where your expectations are met and what they're not met. And hopefully in this talk there will also be stuff that whether your project is on EdTech or not, you might be able to use them, and I'll be open to talking about those aspects as well. So I realized that we might be the only sponsors without much name recognition, so I thought I would point out where we are and all that, even if we are within MIT. So here is where we are. I don't think you can see the laser pointer much, but we're at the intersection of Portland Street and Main Street, not very far from edX. And I guess you guys all know edX, what it does, and the version of it, MITx. So you might not know what MIT Open Learning does. It's kind of an umbrella organization which deals with a lot of different initiatives that MIT has, and you might be familiar with many of those individual initiatives. So, for example, you might know of MIT OpenCourseware, right? Is there anyone who does not know OCW? Probably. MITx, probably a lot of you have taken classes on MITx, or like in the residential version, or you might have even taken some MOOCs that MIT offers for the outside world. Beyond that, you might not be familiar with these other initiatives. For example, MITx MicroMasters, which are like micro-credentialing, so people take some MOOCs online and then they come to MIT to finish their master's degree. So that cuts down like a 2-year degree program into like 18 months, and that makes it cheaper. So that's sort of different kind of emerging trends that we see in EdTech, like this micro-credentialing that MIT is also part of. There are boot camps that happens world over on various topics. There are courses for executives and more like work-based training through XPro, and there are many, many such initiatives. So within that office, I'm part of this team, which is the residential education team, and it's headed by Cheryl Burns, who unfortunately is not here today, but Aaron is there, I can see him, and there's me, and together our interest is not so much world-facing. We are interested with how education happens within this campus, within MIT, and this is the mission statement, and I can assure you there will be not many slides with such blocks of text, but this is one of them. So we help MIT faculty members with, to structure their courses better pedagogically and more effectively. We also try out newer ways of, using technology and kind of keeping track of how students are learning here and what we can do to improve that. So together, for example, we provide technical and pedagogical support. We have a bunch of outreach events. We consult with the MIT faculty members, or MIT faculty members, and we also maintain certain experimental or innovative learning spaces. So you might have seen videos of, for example, what's that called? Like, for example, this glassware light board. You have seen like people write on the other side, and so that's for example one of our initiatives maintained by Jim. You might have seen X-Talks. Have you guys heard of X-Talks? Festival of Learning. So those are like more like communication initiatives that we have. And talking about that, I would plug in this particular event that our office is organizing, which is also happening here in this room, part of that. And this is free for everyone. I would encourage you to go and check out the website, like what what kind of programs there are. It's a whole day program, but you can just drop by anytime for different parts of it. And I checked, like, we don't have anything scheduled for the web lab on January 30th, so, in case you're bored, you can get there. So, before I get into, my talk about EdTech and stuff, I would like to ask you what kind of, educational technology products that you have been using beyond this PowerPoint and, projector, which we find, like, through our survey of MIT students that that's still extremely popular. So that's very interesting to us. But beyond that, would you guys like to name one or two products that you are using that you like or that you don't like? You don't have to say if you don't like, but you can. Anyone? Any volunteer? No one is using any EdTech product, or no one is willing to talk about that. Fantastic. So, so I think you guys have to listen to my talk then. I mean, there is no way out. So, so if I have to think about this talk and the topics that I have, it's kind of loosely structured around, education per se. And I could kind of pull them into these different topics. One is, for example, is content discovery and organization. That's I don't need to emphasize why they're important. There is like expectations around learning, and I'll go into it through some video clips or something, what I mean by that. And once we have all these ideas, one thing that's very interesting to me is how we use our time. Like, time is a zero-sum game. Like if you're doing one thing, you can be doing other things. And even if you're checking Facebook now, I'm thinking like you are listening to this talk, you're actually doing probably neither. But so once we have that, then how we navigate through a learning program. So it might be an institutional degree program, it might be self-guided, it might be something less structured, like let's say this IAP. So how we go about these things and how different EdTech stuff might align with what we're doing here. And when we look at these things, we see that they are actually fairly overlapping, and I'm pretty sure that would be self-evident, but feel free to stop me and ask more questions about it. And as we look into these things, we see that there are some overall themes that might emerge. So I'll kind of point them out. So one thing that I find that we kind of we keep coming back on is whenever we develop a new technology or a new product, we have certain promises that we expect from ourselves when we are developing it or whenever we are using it. But whether they pan out or not, sometimes it's very important to go back and check and do rigorous research. And I will bring out one or two examples when and where that would be important. The other side, other emerging theme I find is data presentation. And that I think is directly relevant to this class, this IAP class, no matter whether your project is on EdTech or not. And the other thing is similarly cognitive load. It's just a couple of slides. It's just to remind you that the concept and what it means without going into the details of what maybe a cognitive scientist and another person would have in their discussion in their field, but it's generally keeping how we think about user interaction at the high level. So all these things would happen in the context of EdTech and education in general. So EdTech is a huge zoo, and it's not one thing, and then there are various stakeholders. Talking about stakeholders, it could be us, like it could be students, it could be administration, it could be instructor, it could be a school system, it could be, you can imagine like there are various groups, and this is taken from one of the EdTech kind of aggregator website. So it's just to show you, there could be curriculum products or products specific to needs of teachers for educational operations, which could be more like enterprise systems or learning management systems. It could be defined, and don't go by like these categories as something, sacrosanct. It's kind of weird, but this could be based on the level of education, so it could be K through 12 or higher education or workplace learning, and then you can't categorize a product anywhere else, so it goes into everything else. So if we look into what they might look like, they could be based on different subjects and STEM or other stuff or language skills. They could be based on or geared towards assessment or classroom response systems, and you might use some of them. You might like for example, clickers or other, based on maybe handheld devices or other things that you might like or not like. There are, for example, these collaboration tools and all that, and so this list goes on. So these are not even like names of companies or anything. These are like categories. So you can imagine like how broad this field is, and possibly, you might be able to see like what project you are working on that might have some sort of linkage to EdTech. I mean, you might find that, oh, this is probably an EdTech product too, like when you look into all these categories. Some of the recent developments that happened on EdTech that I found interesting, recent as in within the last couple of years, so I don't know if you have heard of Jill Watson, which is IBM Watson being used as a TA for a computer science class in GATEC. And a lot of students, actually all the students throughout the semester could not realize that they are actually interacting with an artificially intelligent TA. And she seemed kind of off when you're talking to her about why you could not do it, could not submit your assignment on time or something. It seems like she doesn't really care. But once students got to know that it was actually a computer and a computer program, they were like, oh, actually that makes more sense. She seemed like a little less human, but So it has been unleashed on students, and people were fooled for a semester. So there are initiatives and promises made by augmented reality, virtual reality, and we have been hearing the promises a lot more, and there are many more initiatives coming up. So I believe within the next few years we will see many more products based on that. As of now, there are products that exist in K through 12 or in workplace learning. So, for example, how it helps in workplace learning, you might be able to imagine this. So you need someone, let's say, who needs to go and fix something, let's say, a refrigerator or something, and they don't know the details of how to do that. They have a basic understanding, but they can put on this, headset, and then someone who is more of an expert could essentially guide this person to fix what that should be done. So it's kind of there are various levels of application of it, and there is this startup that's Cambridge-based, and it's doing something that I found very interesting. So they have this headband sort of thing which records brainwaves, and from that it can tell you like whether you are really engaged or not. And we are still far from knowing how that relates to learning, whether that relates to learning, or showing you gamified version of how much attention you have been paying actually translates into your learning. And then there are other questions about, I'm not talking about specifically like talking about this company, but generally it seems like it could be very personal and private data, and how we use that data, and all the privacy-related aspects that I don't know. At your age, I was not very worried about, but then again, that was a different era. So just to finish that aspect of augmented reality, virtual reality, MIT Open Learning launches the Center for Advanced Virtuality. So if you just go to the website, this will be the first slide, at least as of yesterday. You will be able to see and you know more about that. So we also have some stake on what's going on there. So as we are talking about all these different EdTech products and different initiatives, one question that keeps coming up in the EdTech user community, in the instructional designer community, in the instructor community, is that who is in the driver's seat when we are developing and using this technology. Sometimes we do that because this technology looks really cool. We can use it. We can do stuff with it. So let's start with that, and we will think about it later, like how useful it is, it actually is, and all that. And sometimes we find that the really effective technology is almost like using PowerPoint. If a bad PowerPoint slide deck is used, then you don't really learn anything. If it's good enough, then it enhances whatever is being taught. But the PowerPoint itself does not guide what's being taught. So that aspect of technology and EdTech, just like any other technology, is valid, and for EdTech, it's being discussed more and more these days. So with that, the next, so that's mostly about EdTech directly, and next I'm going to talk about some possible areas in education where perhaps next EdTech products could come up. You might find them interesting. So there is this thing about this expectation of learning, and I feel that there could be many more new products where which could be devised based on that area. And the YouTube clip that I'm going to show you, that is from an X talk that I told you earlier, our office organizers. And the presenter was from Gallup polls, so they conduct like this many polls all over the US, maybe all over the world, and they have a fair bit of an idea of how people think about different stuff, their opinion, their perceptions. And right before where this clip starts, there was this question he was talking about, is how people value higher education. And it's relatively clear that everyone values higher education pretty highly. It becomes a little bit more interesting when you dig deeper and you ask whether the quality of higher education is uniform and is viewed equally by different stakeholders. And so these were, so he just talked about that higher education is useful, and then, but the quality is not so much. So let's see. So his name is Brandon Busteed, and now he's somewhere
By the
else.
way, that's not a real no-quality education. It's only, right? So the percent of U.S. adults who say traditional college universities offer high-quality education, it's only 29% who strongly agree with that. By the way, that's not. Not a real noticeable difference. I mean, this is a meaningful difference, right? But it's not a huge difference between the percentage who strongly agree in that statement about community colleges, right? So now here's where it really starts to make some sense to people, because you say, okay, well, what do they mean by quality? This is a really important point that all of us have to understand to be in this current climate of higher education, is that for anybody we ask, it doesn't matter if it's currently enrolled college students, which UCLA asks through their SERV survey, or parents of prospective students, right, 5th through 12th graders, or the U.S. adult population as a whole, the number one reason why people value higher education, pursue higher education, is about a workplace outcome, to get a good job, to get a better job, right, to make more money. Now, this is not to say that that's their exclusive reason for why they value higher education. You can see right away we're going to get in that trap of like, oh, it's not just about economic outcomes, it's also about, engaged citizens, and, right? Yes. Okay, so people have many reasons why they value higher education, but let's just be clear. The top reasons, no matter where we ask, right, are to get a good job. So this becomes really critical as we think about how we're doing relative to this. So this is one where I'd love to say this was strategic on Gallup's part, and it's not. This was an accident. We asked very similar questions in 3 different studies we did in the last couple of years, right? And so the first one was a survey we did of chief academic officers of colleges and universities. And as you can see, a very high percentage of them feel pretty good about how well they're doing in preparing students for success in the workplace. When we ask The general population of US adults, it's a little different story. That 98% goes to 14% who feel confident that college graduates are well prepared for success in the workplace. And you'll go, okay, Brandon, well, what does the US population really know about the workplace readiness of college graduates, right? I mean, they're not experts in this and blah, blah, blah. And you go, okay, yeah, that's true to some extent, but perception is reality, right? And you say, okay, well, what about C-level business executives? So again, slightly different question. So I'm not going to suggest that these are exact apple-to-apple comparisons, but only 11% of C-level business executives strongly agree that college graduates have the skills needed to fill the jobs they're looking to fill, right? So there's a, let's just say, a little gap here. Now, yeah.
So it goes on further into discussing, various nuances, but I think that the difference you see is, kind of crucial, and as a student, I did not think about other stakeholders. And to tie it back to all the edtechs, you can imagine in a field where there are such various different expectations of outcomes, of degrees, there are different products geared towards different people. So when you are, making something, that's something that you can keep in mind. The other thing that I would like to point out is that, when we saw this particular clip, one particular stakeholder was absent, that was the instructors. And this is absolutely not the same question, same comparison, but what are they worried about? And this is something by some of our favorite MIT faculty members, and this is in MIT faculty newsletter. But this is something that they talk about, they think about, and it's about like how deeply students are learning, how quickly they're forgetting, whether they are talking about more like symbol manipulation versus deep understanding, whatever that might mean. So that's something that's not an easy problem to solve, and despite all the technology that we have access to today, we are still struggling with this idea. So one quote from there. This is what they have found through their teaching a lot, and that's something something that we can work on or we can think about. And just to make sure that they make sure that they are not blaming the students. I mean, it's something that is more like a problem with the system and the way things are done, and it should be solved, but we really don't know how. And also, this is probably the core idea of this, which sort of connects with the bigger picture of as our human knowledge grows exponentially with all of us doing various different things. Essentially, we need to learn more stuff in less amount of time. Otherwise, our civilization can't progress. Like we make things more splintered, but no one has a better idea of how things communicate with each other. And that also brings us to better content management and better organization of content. So this was also part of like what they talk about. So that brings us back to coming from the residential team, the focus on how learning happens at MIT, and which could look like this, but which could also look like this. And it's really amazing. Like when I came to MIT and when I found out that you guys built a freaking roller coaster in campus. I mean, this is just so mind-boggling. And like and what is the educational value of that? And if we ask ourselves, we are not really prepared to do research on that or study that or even understand how to go about that. And from that perspective, I think we as in the community of education researchers, we have a lot to learn from you and get help from you about how we let's say record these experiences, how we make it in a way that's more structured. So there is this Media Lab clip that I found. I'm not playing it now, but they have some initiative to sort of track this experiential learning that goes on at MIT, and it's something that's being spoken of more and more at MIT. And I believe if you are imaginative in that direction, you might be able to contribute through your this project or sometime later. Cataloging your own experience of what you were learning, when you were learning, and whether that's inside a classroom, that could be through an informal club, it could be through an IAP class, it could be through a party. I mean, it's just hard to know what exactly learning happens. So I talked a little bit about these expectations around learning and sort of this time use a little bit. Oops. So never mind. So the next thing is about content discovery, which sort of related to what I told you a little bit about, that we need to find better content, which has become somewhat easier after Google came into being. And there is also a lot of on-demand education, so to speak. So, OCW and MITx are two such resources which have a lot of material. And I don't know how you feel about when you search things there, but there is still no personal recommendation system, as you are searching things and finding things, and you don't have to limit yourself on just these two websites. But what tracks your own learning and own physics for yourself, not for some other company which would be able to sell you ads based on what you have searched, but how you tie that back to your own learning. So that's something that one could think of. And with that, I would tell you that there are a couple of initiatives which tie this content discovery, content mapping ideas with this other idea I told you about, which is how deeply we are learning, what the learning outcomes are like. So there is this crosslinks. I'm not sure if it still exists, but here MIT students themselves have contributed the different topics that they have learned and how they have gone from one topic to another as they have taken classes at MIT. And Karen Wilcox, who was the main person behind that crosslinks, she has a different lab now about mapping concepts and kind of connecting them through notes and graphs, which is very interesting. And if you are interested in that sort of thing, you can check them out. There are various chord diagrams and various ways of visualizing and thinking about how you do organization, how you organize content and tie it with learning, and whether that's aligned with how the subjects are structured, or how one goes through, how one navigates through MIT and takes different classes. So these are, I'm telling you, I'm throwing, these ideas, these are not settled stuff yet, so there are stuff that you can do. Oh, there's a video which kind of shows how they different things connect to each other. Okay. So we know a little bit about better content organization, the need for that. We have heard the the importance of deeper learning, and all of these are kind of connected to more efficient time use. And that's something interesting, because I was earlier talking about how time is a zero-sum game. You can't do too many things at the same time. And how to know about what kind of time use pattern that we see in people. So here's a hideous chart that's organized and collected by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And just one word of advice: if you can, please do not use a pie chart. The same thing could be told much better with bar diagram, and you would understand much better. It's very difficult for human beings to understand anything from these angles. In any case, that aside, this is how students in the US spend time all over, and it's pretty. I'm pretty sure it's very different at MIT or many other residential higher education places. But leisure and sports 4 hours, traveling 1.5 hours, working and related activities 2.3 hours, and educational activities 3.5 hours. I'm not sure if that pans out, that aligns with your expectation. Like, are you spending just 3.5 hours per day on education? I'm not sure. I think there's more than that. And, maybe part of that is fun. Maybe you are building a roller coaster, and we would not count that. Like, is that educational, or does that go into the education bucket, or does that go into working and related bucket, or does that go into the educational activities bucket? So the other, bigger point about that is how we collect information about these things. The only resource that we have for that is asking people survey questions, like, hey, like, what did you do last week? What did you do last month? How many hours have you spent on blah, blah, blah? And this is a very popular and very important survey. It's called NESI. It's National Survey of Student Engagement. It's, I think, conducted by Indian University, and it's conducted all over the US for multiple years and all that. And it's still based on asking people, and it tries to measure student engagement, and it's still based on asking people and on their self-reported numbers, and that's the best idea that we have had so far. The question is whether we can do better. I don't remember what I had for lunch last week Wednesday or something, but if I ask myself how many times I visited grocery store in the last month, I don't just make up a number. I can go and check on my Google Map history for the last month, and I know exactly how many times and when I have been to a grocery store. When we ask about how many times, how much time I have spent working on homework and classroom or something, and this is not just about MIT, it's everywhere. We just think of a ballpark number and throw it out there, and that's the best that we can do. So, is there any way of improving that? And I leave it to you to be imaginative about it, and how we can manage or think about how we use time. And I'm not, just to be clear, I'm not preaching you about how you should use your time. I'm just saying how we can, be more intentional about knowing how we are using time, and whether tracking that allows us to understand more about how we learn or not. So let's assume for a moment that we know the importance of clinical learning, better content organization, management, and we also have ways to understand how we manage our time. Then the question is, how do we use all that information to navigate ourselves through a learning program? And when I'm saying learning program, it could be something like an MIT degree program. It could be something more self-guided. So, how many of you use firehose.guide? Everyone. So it's pretty amazing, right? It gives you so much information about what other people have done, what other people have said about a class, and what a class is all about. And there is this other initiative that started at Stanford last to last year. It's called Carta. Have you guys heard of Carta? Anyone? So you can imagine it's Firehose on steroids. It's Firehose meets past grade statistics. So it will also tell you not just the evaluation of people and what the course is about, but it will also tell you average grade on that, and how much time people have spent against self-reported and all that. And that sounds pretty amazing, doesn't it? Like if you only knew that what the class is like and what kind of grades people are getting. This is what it looks like. It has, it shows you all the, this is from that paper. You have to be a Stanford student to be able to see it. So that gives you a dashboard about all this information about performance and all that, later grades of previous students, and it's all based on the students who have actually taken the course. So this sounds like a good idea. Till you, okay. I know what that slide is. Sorry guys, sleepless night. Here, so they have done a study on that, which shows that when people use this guide, Carta, the grade dropped And that was pretty insane, if you think about it. Like, you tell people, like, oh, this is what people have, gotten before, and like, they have done more research on that. And if I remember correctly, the conclusion was something like, once students see that, oh, people have spent like 6 hours and they got like A, good enough, like I can do that too. And that ends up being maybe because people spend less time, less effort on that once they see that information. There is a variation in which people suffer more than others. And at the same time, that number you see in the first place, that people have spent like 6 hours on an average on that course, that already is sort of made up, right? Because you are getting that number from asking people how much time they have spent on doing that. So anyway, so that's something that tells us, when we are designing a system, and Carta is very much a research project as well, so they are looking into these aspects. When we are designing a system like this, we have to be careful about intended and unintended consequences, and we have to be kind of humble about where we might be doing harm that we did not think about, or the way it's evolving. That it could also be surprising and nice, and either way we should keep an open mind and do more than gut feeling. And one more such idea of the importance of doing research on that is that there are various brain exercise, cognitive exercises that are blowing up, and it used to be very big and it's still pretty big, it seems. Apparently it's $1 billion industry. But there have been a lot of research. This one is from 2010, which sort of looks at some 11,000 people. And it finds that when you do all this brain activity, exercise sort of stuff, you kind of get better at doing that specific thing. But it does not deliver the idea that this cognitive improvement is transferable. Like in an unrelated topic, you don't necessarily do any better. So that's a promise that's not delivered, and that's something that we should, when we're designing a system, we could look at that. And so these are kind of roughly put together all these topics, and this is like my 2 or 3 slide spiel on models of memory and kind of staying away from creating too much cognitive overload. So whenever we receive information, and this is important for not necessarily anything to do with EdTech, but if you're designing developing a website or any system that interacts with other users, so it could be a course which is put on MITx, it's important to understand that we all have very limited working memory, and we have a lot more long-term memory, and we sort of try to do a back and forth between these two places which acts as like stores of memory. And whenever we face a new task which produces some cognitive load on this working memory, which is limited, we have these 3 things which kind of compete with one another. One is this task difficulty, which the task at hand might be intrinsically more difficult, like let's say doing a small sum like 2 + 2, that's like easier than doing, let's say, a complicated integral. Then there is ineffective load, and then there is effective load. So effective load is what that helps you to solve that, or understand what the website is saying. And ineffective load is everything else that kind of distracts you from what you're trying to do. So whenever you have a more difficult task, because the whole thing is constant, you want to have this effective load go up so that people can focus on what they're trying to do. And so you have to reduce the ineffective load. So you might need to break up your whatever you're presenting into smaller chunks. So that's useful when you're thinking about user interaction and how that connects with how people think about cognitive loads and stuff. So the other thing is, I'm going to one of the last topics, which is, this whole data presentation. So I talked quite a bit of content mapping organization, which sort of ties with, how people think about their own learning. I talked about expectations around learning and experiential learning, and all that kind of boils down to how we keep track of all these things. And there is a community which is very much into quantified self, and I'm not going into any sort of judgment or anything. I'm just saying that's what they're called. And there is this sort of attitude of being able to track ourselves, and that gamification aspect that makes it more entertaining, and we sometimes are more engaged in doing what we are doing. And while that is there are a lot of challenges when it comes to putting together data that are less structured. So for example, if I ask you how you did in your class, that's easy. That's in your transcript, that's in your homework records. But as we talked about, like what we learned from, let's say, seeing other people making the roller coaster or ourselves building it, that's more difficult to track. But if we have to track that, we have to be able to develop better metric about how to think about those experiences and how we, kind of put them into chunks, how we can record them, how we can make a system, maybe for other people to record them. So I came across this website, this project by these two information designers, and it's called Dear Data. So deardata.com, so you can go there and check it out. I think we have time to see a quick video. By the way, do you have questions? You can stop me anytime and ask me questions. So I see I have 8 more minutes, and I don't know if I should take this time, but maybe I should. So here's their project, I'm showing this just as an, by the way, have any of you heard about this project, or? Okay, cool. So I think I got thumbs up. So is it worth showing? What is that? Okay, great. So I'll go ahead and show it.
I'm Georgia. I'm Italian, but I live in New York.
I'm Stephanie. I was born in Denver, Colorado, but I've lived in London for the past 13 years.
We had only met each other in person twice when in September 2014 we decided to collaborate on a year-long project to get to know each other through our data.
Dear Data was conceived as a new type of correspondence through creating and sending hand-drawn data postcards across the ocean to each other. We collected personal data around a shared topic in order to investigate and reveal aspects of ourselves and our days to share with the other person.
By counting and reducing in a way to data, even the most shameful personal revelations, they somehow felt not so shameful anymore. They are data.
As we gathered our weekly data, the process was much more labor-intensive than just deriving standard metrics through using technological devices.
The very first week of Dear Data, we chose a pretty cold and impersonal topic. How many times do we check the time in a week? We discover something about the other person's days through the pretext of my data collection. Why was I checking the time? What was I doing? Was I bored? Was I hungry? Was I late?
I finally realized during our week of gathering data on the urban wildlife we saw around us. Each week isn't a scientific, comprehensive survey of every single animal I passed by or every emotion I felt and so on, but a record of Georgia and I noticing and us marking our awareness. Some weeks we notice more and some weeks we notice less, and that's an indication of our personalities and our lives as well.
Drawing with data, when the drawing is the final output, can be painful. It's laborious, demanding, it's frustrating. My week 24 is a perfect example. A week of doors, to give the other person the idea of the pace of our days through the internal and external environments we entered in.
Often during the project, the act of counting became something that was emotionally charged. In week 29, Georgia and I ended up tracking moments when our partners inspired love or inspired annoyance, This card became like a love letter to my husband. I like how instead of giving someone flowers, now you can give a data set. Once the visualization is complete each week, we would drop the postcard in our postbox and wait with our fingers crossed.
We learn to pay attention, to live in the present much more, to be more aware of our surroundings and of our behaviors with new lenses.
Finally, we both realized that data is the beginning of the story, not the end, and should be seen as a starting point for questioning and understanding the world around us, instead of seeing it as the definitive answer to all of our questions.
All right. So, in case you are looking for more ideas about all this wacky data presentation or something, or what kind of data presentation you should think about or something, I came across this podcast, which I like quite a bit. Some episodes are more interesting than others, but you can, if you're just looking for ideas, that could be one of the resources. But and of course, like source of data, these are not really in my, there are much better people, Aaron and everyone who can guide you through all that process, but getting the data, like if you are searching for the kind of data that you need to present, there are various sources, even if the government is shut down. And capturing unstructured experiences, like if I have to summarize this talk, which kind of covered many, disparate topics together. So I think one is capturing unstructured experiences. We have very little, effort in that direction, and I think there are a lot of opportunities. So you guys are really smart and imaginative. So that could be something. That's a hard challenge, and you can take a stab at that. And it doesn't have to be in this 2 weeks period, but imagine use creativity around data presentation, thinking about what kind of metric you would like to use. And generally, importance of feedback, that whether you collect that through rigorous research or through more informal way of understanding of how other people are using or looking at your project. And with that, I'm available in your campus if you have any question about about your project related to these topics, or any of these usage of data or anything. I'm available. I'm part of MIT, so feel free to send me an email. Thank you so much. Any questions? Yeah.
Are there opportunities for students to work with you guys? Do you have bureaus? What do you guys think?
Yeah, so we did have one bureau last year at this point. Yes. And we also had an intern. It's not super structured, but definitely open learning as a whole. There are opportunities, but at the same time they're very different in all different places. So, but yes, I mean, if you are interested, do check it out. And sometimes when we have that, we post our advertisement through the Europe office. Any other questions? Thank you.